Hi, I'm Heather from GG Stitching, and today we are going to start our fabric preparation for our baby quilt tutorial that we're going to be doing. So fabric requirements were posted a couple of weeks ago, and so now you should have your fabrics, and we're going to press them before we get ready to cut. So at this point, you should have watched a video about fabric preparation and whether or not to pre-wash or not pre-wash, so that way you made the decision based on what you prefer. I will say that mine right now is not pre-washed, but we're going to go ahead and use it. So I'm going to be using an iron, and most likely, because I have some stubborn wrinkles, I will probably use steam. The only reason why I'm doing that now is because it is not cut into shapes yet, and if the fabric shrinks from the starching I'm going to do and the steaming I'm going to do, that's okay because I have not cut into anything yet into a specific shape. I'm going to also make sure that I do that with all the fabrics. So in other words, I know that I didn't pre-wash. I know there could be some shrinkage. So if I starch one and you steam on one, I need to do it on all of them so that way if there's any shrinkage that's going to happen there before cutting, it happens to all of them. So I'm going to open this one up and get it out on my board. I'm going to be pressing and starching on the wrong side. So this is a personal preference for me that I like to use the starch on the wrong side of the fabric. Now with the best press, you don't have any of the flaking, but if you're using the can starch and some of the older starches, sometimes you can get some flaking. If I'm going to have that, I would rather have it on the back of my fabric than the front of my fabric. So I'm going to spray that down. I'm going to let it absorb a little bit, and then I'm going to, let that dry just a bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and get to the pressing, or ironing in this case. So it is okay at this point to do an ironing motion. So when I say that, there is a difference between ironing and pressing, and you're going to hear that throughout the process as we go. So when you iron, you're doing a back and forth motion. And right now, we're not stretching any fabric out. That isn't a big deal. When you have cut your pieces to size, we do not iron anymore. So we don't use that motion of ironing. We're going to press. And so pressing is just pushing the iron down, letting it sit there, and then lifting it up. No motion that can distort the fabric. So we're going to go ahead, and it's okay to iron at this point. Okay, moving it up. And I'm using a cordless iron for this one. Typically at home, when I'm working with bigger pieces, I'm actually using a corded one so that I don't have to wait for anything to heat back up. This one stays heated fairly well, but if you're dealing with, say, like a wide back, something really wide like that, it would be a little time consuming to have to keep putting it back on the base. So you might do a corded iron for that part. Okay, so we're going to fold that up. Now I'm still going to fold this with the salvage edges matching, which is the way that it comes off of the bolt. And then that way this is going to be ready when it is time to cut. It's already going to be in the right direction. So we're going to repeat this with the other fabrics. So remember that in the cutting that we're going to be doing first, we're going to be using 3 fabrics for the center, and then we will have also a border fabric. We're going to go ahead and we're going to cut everything at once though. So go ahead and press everything and get it all ready for cutting. Okay, so I'm going to apologize now if my lighting is bad, but we're going to do our best. So we are ready to start cutting out our strips. And so we're going to come to the board. We're going to fold our fabric in half the way that it came off of the bolt. So in other words, we want salvage edges together. Now, in this one, they happen to line up really well. These don't have to match. So in other words, if you're lining them up and these are lined up, but you end up with a bubble of fabric down here, you don't want a bubble down here at your fold. This is where it's important. Those salvage edges will be getting trimmed off so we can even them up there. But so you want to make sure that you don't have a bubble of fabric here. So you want it to be laying nice, nice at the fold. We're going to line up with a straight line on the mat. We're using that for a reference point. We're going to have different reference points as we cut. So our first one is going to be a bottom edge, and we want to make sure that we can see lines here and here. So if you have a big enough mat, you can do it with one fold of fabric because this is wide enough. If you're dealing with a narrower mat, not as wide as this, you may have to do another fold so that you can see. You need the lines on both sides to be using it for reference points. And then you want to make sure that this is smooth and flat, no bubbles in the fold. And it doesn't matter that these aren't lining up exactly 100% because, like I said, those salvage edges are going to come off. We're not using those for a reference point, okay? But I have a wide enough mat, so we're going to lay this out. We're going to find a line here, straight edge to use. And I'm going to look here and get as close to a line as I can. We're going to be straightening this edge up first. So I want to make sure that I get, I don't want to cut off too much of my fabric. So I'm going to get as close to a line as I can. And I want to make sure that if I can't see this back layer, you pull this top layer aside to make sure that it is past that line. We don't want to trim up and clean up an edge and then realize that the fabric behind wasn't up to the line, okay? So we're going to do that. I'm straight along here, okay? And now let's talk about our rulers. I'm going to try to bring this into focus a little bit. So this is the ruler I'm using. And you see how they have little openings here? So these are where we're going to want to make sure that the fabric is passing through when we are trying to do straight cuts. So I'll try to show that a little more as we go through. So in this case, so that this way we can see on the camera, I'm using 29. So I'm looking at 29 on either one. And I'm right-handed, so my fabric is going to the right. If you're left-handed, you would be doing this the opposite direction. So I'm going to make sure that the ruler lines up on 29, both on top and bottom. But not only am I making sure of that, I can also use these other hash points on my mat to make sure that I'm straight. So in other words, I'm not going by just one line. I'm looking even on the 1-inch line, so on the 30, and making sure that it is showing up in those little spots on 30 on the 1-inch line on my ruler so that I know that I'm straight. Now we're going to talk about cutting. So as we get ready to cut, you have to think about your ruler sliding and your center of gravity. So you do not make one full cut. Now, when you get more experienced, you might be able to do this just fine. If you are a beginner and haven't done this much, we want to make sure that our hand, as we're getting ready to cut, is not too close because we don't want to cut into our fingers. Our center of gravity is over the board. You should not have to press that hard, okay? You shouldn't feel like there's a whole lot of pressure. It should just be steady. It's a smooth forward motion. It's not a back and forth like a pizza cutter. That's a great way to have something slip. It's a great way to cut yourself. So please don't do that. As we get past, so we always cut just slightly past our fingers. So from here to here, and then stop. Okay, you do not adjust your hand while you're in the middle of cutting. And then we're going to walk our hand up and we're going to continue our cut. All right, so we're going to straighten that edge. I'm going to get my ruler ready. I've got my fingers tinted, okay? And like I said, I'm not doing it too heavy. And I'm cutting just past my fingers, stopping. I can readjust because I did move my ruler as I went. I'm going to set my hands and I'm going to continue going, okay? Now, before I move that away, I can pull to see, and you can see I didn't make it all the way through, so I'm kind of glad this happened so you guys could see. It did not make it all the way through. So I'm going to line myself back up. I'm going to kind of fold this out of the way so that I don't cut on that again. I don't need to. And I can hear the fabric cutting now. Set that down. I'm going to fold this out of the way. And now I know that this is a clean edge. All right. So I have a clean edge. So now for our baby quilt, and I will be posting these. So for the baby quilt, which is what I'm going to be cutting, I'm also going to post the lap size ones. So for this, we are going to be cutting 4.5-inch strips. So 4.5 inches times the width of the fabric if you're doing the baby quilt. If you're wanting to do the lap quilt, we're going to be cutting 6.5 inches. So I'm going to be doing 4.5. So what we do, we're going to find 4.5 on our ruler. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a halfway point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and a half. All right, so when I line this up, I'm going to be using a couple different reference points. I'm going to be making sure that I have a straight edge on the fold. Okay, so I can see that. And then I have that 4.5-inch line going straight up. And that should be riding the edge of the fabric. But then also, I'm making sure that I'm lined up on these hashtags or hash marks on the mat as well. So I'm using 3 or 4 different reference points before I cut to make sure that I'm straight. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, measure twice, cut once, and a half. So there's the half mark. I have a line that's going straight on the fold here, and it looks really good. And everything lines up and matches at the top of my board. So once again, I'm going to tint my fingers. And when I do this, I'm going to try to do it this way so you can see. I'm putting my finger up here. My wrist should be pretty neutral in a flat position. You should not have your hand turned like this. It should just be a natural, it's kind of hard to tell with this angle, a natural flow. I'm going to stop when I'm right past my fingers, walk my hand up, and continue. Sounded like it went through well, so I'm going to pull gently, and it did. So I have my first strip. So there's strip 1. I need 3 of these. So there's 1. And remember, they're 4.5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Half-inch mark there. Making sure that I'm on that fold still. Making sure that I line up with my hash marks at the top of the board. Stopping, walking my hand up, still checking, make sure nothing shifted. Continuing on. And there's strip 2. Now, when you are cutting lots of strips, more than what we're going to be doing, fabric is fluid, right? It's not stiff, it's not permanent, not like a piece of wood, not like a piece of cardboard. So if at any time it looks like you're no longer straight, you can always re-straighten an edge and then continue on. So if it seems like towards the end it's gotten wonky and it's a little wider or a little narrower, don't be afraid to re-straighten your edge if you need to. doing 4.5 inches again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure you always check. If you have a ruler and depending on the color of fabric you're using, you're having trouble seeing your lines, we can always use tape. So we can always use painter's tape or the glow tape, anything like that on here that would help make that line stand out for you. So once again, lining up with the bottom folded of the fabric, 4.5 inch line, and then making sure that the hash marks from the ruler and the mat are lining up. Stopping, walking my hand up, continuing on. And there we go. So we've got strip 3. So we needed 3 strips from this purple for the 4.5 inch ones that we're doing. If you're doing the lap size quilt, you need 4 strips. So you would need 1 more strip at 6.5. And like I said, I will have the cutting instructions posted in the description so that you can make sure to get the right one. So we're done with this fabric. And you can tell I had plenty more left, but I'm going to put that aside. And now we're going to subcut. So I'm going to subcut these. I'm going to work with the purple that we've got out now just so that way I can show you this part before I move on to the next color. Because we're going to just repeat this step with the other 2 colors that are in the center. So I'm going to use a straight line on my board. Okay, it could be anywhere, just as long as it's something you can see. So I'm going to be lining up on a straight edge. And I'm only going to do one at a time for you guys, for beginners. You could lay these out multiples. So in other words, if you're confident and you get confident in your cuts, you could do multiples of these at one time. So in other words, I can see a line there and I lined up with that line. And then I could line up there and I could cut through all of these at one time. I also could lay them on top of each other and cut. But since this is for beginners, you need to really get the feel of rotary cutting through a single, and it's not a single layer, it's still a double layer, but a single strip. And then once you build that confidence that your ruler's not going to slip and you're not going to have any problems, you can then start to layer. So for now, though, we're going to do it this way. So I'm going to line up with a line here. We're going to be cutting these salvage edges off now, okay? So you want to make sure, you'll see little perforations in the fabric. You want to make sure that you line up because you're going to be cutting those up. So you want to check where the perforation ends and then pick the line behind it because you don't want to waste any fabric. So, I mean, I pretty much line those dots right up there and I know I'm going to be cutting them off. So I'm lining this up on the line on my board. Cutting that out so that I have a straight edge to work with. And now we're going to subcut. So in other words, we have our strip and now we're going to cut our pieces out of that strip. So we're subcutting and we need to get 4.5 inch squares out of the strip. So we're going to get as many as we can out of the strip. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1/2 inch mark. And same thing that we were doing before is that I'm making sure that I have a straight line along the edge of this strip. I'm making sure that the 4.5 line is right on the cut of the fabric. And I'm making sure that my ruler lines up with the hash marks on the board. So I'm using a 3-point, really, you know, a 360 view, although you can't really see on that edge, but tenting my fingers, nice neutral wrist position, cutting through. And now we've got 2 squares because this is folded in half. So we have 2 of our 20 squares that we need. One, 2, 3, 4, 1/2 inch mark. Making sure I've got a line here on the bottom of my strip. Making sure that I line up on my mat well. Oh, everything looks in place. And now there's another 2, so we have 4. And we're going to keep doing this down the line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1/2 inch mark. Making sure that this is on the bottom of the strip. The lines line up with my mat. Everything looks good. And now we have 6. Now, if for some reason you slip or you get something that is looking kind of wonky, you can always clean up your edge again. You can always re-straighten your strip. Don't just keep cutting. Just feel free, to always adjust. Things happen, and so you may need to adjust as you go. Things slip. It's kind of what you build in and make sure you've got a little bit of extra fabric. 1, 2, 3, 4, half-inch mark, lined up with the bottom. And there we go. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 out of that one strip. I have this piece left that when you open it up, it will make another square if you need it. I typically don't do that yet. I'll put this aside. If at the end I've had something slip or I ran short, I didn't quite get enough, I will open these up and use them. Otherwise, this becomes a part of my stash. All right, so we're going to continue on and do that with the rest of these strips. Now, with the lap quilts, you're going to be doing the same exact thing, except you're going to be using 6.5 inches instead of 4.5 inches. So you won't get quite as many squares out of a strip as I just did for this one. You'll probably only get 6 versus my 8 that I got out of here. So I'm straightening up my edge. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch mark. There's 2 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, half. Lines up at the bottom. Lines are all meeting on the mat. And I don't normally move my strip. I normally just keep cutting, but I'm trying to make sure that I stay within the view of the camera here for you. So 4.5, making sure I line up at the bottom. Lines are all good on the mat. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch. Remember, always double check. Now, if you wanted to, and we have that extra one, so I'll show you this. If you had a 4.5-inch square, you could be using that square here. I don't have a 4.5 with me right now, so I'm just using my big rulers, and you can see the big ruler works just fine. If you have a square that you'd like to use, and it happens to be 4.5, you could use the square and not have to do all that double counting. Now, for the 6.5-inch strips, and this is yellow, so it's kind of hard for you to see. There we go. This is a 6.5-inch square. So with those 6.5-inch strips, I'd be able to lay this right on there, and the strip should just fit that. I wouldn't even have to really measure. But I'm not doing the 6.5. I'm doing the 4.5. So we're going to keep going. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the half. Making sure that line is parallel. I guess I should have paid attention because I need 20. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. There's 18. So one more cut. Oops, and I kind of am off the line, so I'm going to readjust. There we go. One, 2, 3, 4, half, parallel, and that should be my 20. So that should be all we need out of the purple. So I'm going to put these aside. Okay, so we're going to get the, so I'm out with my green next. So my second fabric is the green. I'm smoothing it out, making sure that I don't have a bubble. Now the fold down here isn't as crisp as the other one was. I could take it back to the iron if I wanted to make sure, but when I smooth it down, it's laying nice, so I know I don't have a bubble there. So I'm going to, once again, find a straight line on my mat to line up with. Now on this one, see how we can't see the back, the second layer back here, and I want to make sure I know what line to line up with. So I'm going to pull this back and see where I'm at to pick a number, because I don't want to cut off too much. So I'm going to get as close to, in this case, it's number 31. I'm going to get as close to 31 as I can here. This is my short spot. Down here, I have plenty of room, but I don't try to line it up with the 31, because then all of this would be crooked. I make sure that I line up with my fold on the bottom of the mat, make sure that I have it straight there, and then close to that 31 as I can, and then the rest of this will trim up to that. So I'm going to line up with the 31. To straighten this edge, to give us a clean start. Tenting my fingers, not cutting past it, stopping, walking my hand up, and finishing, following through. And there's my piece. So for the green, we're doing the same thing. We need 3 4.5-inch strips for the baby size quilt, and we need 4 6.5-inch strips for the lap size quilt. So we're cutting the same thing that we did with that purple. So 4.5, making sure that I'm parallel with that fold, making sure my lines all line up with the mat. And I felt my hand push that, so I'm double checking that I'm still lined up. I am. I'm going to fold this out of the way so I don't cut through it again and reline it up. And there we go. So if you feel it slip, stop. See if anything cut into it. See if you need to re-straighten an edge. Just make sure that you stop. Don't continue on. You're going to feel it. As you get used to what you're feeling, you're going to feel when this actually cuts through. You're going to hear when it cuts through, and you're going to know when it misses. You always want to cut away from you. Cutting towards you, you don't want to take a chance of something slipping. And believe me, these cuts with these things are bad. You'll bleed really bad. So you want to make sure that you always cut away from you when you can. That's just a safety thing. Tense your hand. Stop. Walk the hand. Now, if you're pushing too hard on this rotary cutter, I mean like really pushing, you are going to push the ruler out of place. So that's why I said it's just a firm pressure. It's nothing too hard. You should not be struggling to do this. Right there, I have a little bit of a skip towards the end. So I'm going to fold this out of the way because I don't want to cut into what I've already done. And sometimes that happens, guys. Sometimes it just doesn't want to go through one. There might be a burr in your mat. Might be a burr in your blade. One, 2, 3, 4, 1/2 inch, parallel to the bottom. Everything lines up here. There we go. Okay, so we only needed 3 strips, so I'm going to put this out of the way. And now I'm going to show you what I talked about. I'm just going to show you. If you are not comfortable with this, please do not do this yet. Do 1 strip at a time. But I just wanted to show you what I was talking about with doing 2. So I'm making sure that I'm getting those, let's pull this back so you can see, making sure that I'm finding the shortest point. So I'm not going to cut too much of these off, but I want to make sure You're going to see what I'm talking about with those little dots, those little holes in there, perforations there. We want to make sure we don't leave that in our quilts. That's part of the selvages, and they're woven so tightly, they react differently, so we want to get rid of them when we're actually piecing. So when we're lining up on the mat, and I know you can't see this too well, but remember I talked about these views that you have here. You should be able to see the line from your mat in those little openings so that you know that it's following along this line. That's what I'm looking at when I'm doing this. So not only can I see that it's on a line here, I can use the next line in this inch mark, and I can see in those windows that the white line from my mat is lined up with the little black lines of my ruler. Tent my fingers. Pull away my edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, half-inch mark. Making sure that I'm parallel with that bottom strip. I can also see on a line here that I'm parallel with that strip, and everything is lining up on the mat. So now I just managed to get 4 squares in one cut. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch. Everything is parallel. And now there's 8. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch. Parallel here, parallel there. Lines look good on the board. And there's 12. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch. Parallel with that strip, parallel with that. And now there's 16. I'm going to save those. And we're doing 20, so that means I only need 4, so that means I need 2 cuts on this. I'm going to clean up that edge. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch mark. These are all parallel. One, 2, 3, 4, half-inch. Scooched, see, scooched. I went too fast. And that should be 20. Okay, so we are ready for the white. Now, the white has strips that we're going to use for squares, but this also is used for the inner border. So we're going to be cutting something different out of this after we do our strips. So we're going to do our strips to get our squares, our 4.5-inch squares. So in this case, with the layout that I chose, we're going to be using 5 strips because there's a white after the color. And then we're also going to need strips for the inner border. So you're going to be cutting a new size. So this is also a good one because this piece of fabric wasn't as clear, cut nicely here as the original ones we just worked with. So you're going to be able to see that. So I'm making sure that when I fold it, I didn't have any bubbles here. And this is a good example of sometimes the selvage edges are not going to line up. Okay, so here they're lining up really nice, but see how they kind of dip here? This isn't really that important because the selvages are going to get cut off. So the main thing, no bubble here. We know that we're laying nice here within the grain. That's going to be trimmed off later, so that's okay. And look at how ragged this is on this edge. This edge is really ragged, so we're going to make sure that we find the short point, which it looks like the short point is on the top, so we're going to be cleaning it up like we did the other ones. We're going to be using the 30 to clean this up here. So I'm making sure that I can see the 30 there and the 30 here. And we're going to clean up that edge. And that didn't sound right. Like I said, you'll be able to hear it. Walk my hand up. I'm going to give a pull here to see if it went through. And right there it didn't. So it's nice to do that lightly ahead of time before you move the ruler or anything, so that you know that you can get in there. There. And you know that you're getting the fabric out of the way, that you're not going to be cutting a little divot out of it. Lay that back down. All right. So I need 5 4.5-inch strips for this one. And if you were doing the 6-inch, 6.5-inch one, you need 7 of these. One. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. There's 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. I don't know if something I didn't remember to tell you in the beginning. When you're lining up your blade next to the ruler, it's straight up and down. Okay, it's not at an angle. Don't cut at an angle. If you cut at an angle, you're adding pressure onto your ruler and you're going to push it out of the way. But not only that, you're not going to get a straight cut. You're going to wonder why your strips are missized. Remember that it's always straight up and down, not at an angle. There's 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Walk the hand. There's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 more. There's 5. Now remember, I said I need those 2-inch strips next for the baby quilt. So I'm going to pull this out, move it over, give myself a new line here. So we're still lining up with the bottom of the mat and then with the edge. For the lap quilt, you're going to be cutting 8 2-inch strips. For this, I'm cutting 4. So we're doing 1, 2, making sure same thing, lining up at the bottom, making sure everything looks good on the mat. Walking the hand up. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. And there's 4. Okay, so I'm done with this. I'm going to put this away. So now we have these, and we're going to hang on to these. You can put these in a little baggie, label them, but these are the strips we're going to use later. We're not subcutting them. These are staying into strips. These now we're going to go back and make into our 4.5-inch squares. and we need 40 squares. So I'm cleaning up that edge. One, two, three, 4.5. And there's 4. There's 8. There's 12. There's 16. Two, three, 4.5. There's 20. Okay, so unfortunately, the other end of my video for the white cut off, and I didn't notice, and I already cut through, but you saw how it was going, and so I needed 40 of the white squares, and I finished that. So we have those. So all of our squares are cut, and then we have our 2.5-inch strips. Here's all of our squares of colors. So now I use sandwich bags. Now I have things here that I have recycled and reused over and over. So I, not really environmentally friendly if you use, throw them away all the time. But I have reused these for ages just to hang on to them. So there's my strips for that because these I'll be using later. And so that way I know that they're covered. They're not going to get dirty. They're going to be stored fine. And then here are the squares. We will be using those for our next part. So it's up to you whether or not you store them separately, by color. If I was doing a quilt that there was different sizes to the different colors, or they were labeled A, B, C, D, I would probably do a separate one so that I could label them A, B, C, D to be able to follow them with the pattern. But since we're doing a really basic layout that we have not labeled anything A, B, C, D, and these are all the same size, I can store them together until we're ready to use them. So I'm just going to put those in there to keep myself organized. And then we're going to go to the yellow. So we're going to be cutting out our strips for our borders out of the yellow. So we're going to be doing the same thing, that we line up with a nice edge on the board. Make sure we find where our short piece is. Can't really see the edge. There we go. There we go. Needed to adjust again. And we're going to clean up that edge. And for the baby size quilt, we're going to be cutting 8 strips of the yellow. Actually, for both of them, we're going to be cutting them the same. So, yep, I left the borders the same size. So we're going to be cutting 8 strips. You could probably get away with 7 for the baby and 8 for the lap. It just depends on where the seam would go, so I'm going to do 8. 4.5. 1. And I did leave it as 4.5 even on the lap. I did not do wider borders on the lap quilt. You can do wider borders if you'd like to, but I did not calculate yardage for that. Four and a half. Make sure everything lines up. One, two, three, 4.5. Away. Didn't go through the last part. Last one. Boy, I cut that close, didn't I? 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And there's our borders. So these will get stored just like this for now until we get to that stage. So we have cut our whole project. So we are ready for the next step. Okay, we finished step 1 of our baby quilt tutorial. Should be all done cutting by now and ready to start sewing. We will start that in the next one. So if you liked the content, please like, subscribe, follow, all of those good things. Give me a comment on what you found helpful or ask questions. Please ask away. The idea is for this to be easy for you and to be able to answer those things that might be coming up as you're going along that you just aren't sure of. There's no stupid questions. Anything that pops up in your head may be a question of somebody else that they're too afraid to ask. So please let me know. We want this to be fun for you, and welcome to the world of quilting.